Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video you have my next episode of Recent Reads. This was a week of basically two different stories. It feels like you have the before back to work days, before the in-service days they call them, and then the school days and then the weekend. So I got a lot read on the two bookends of this week, not a lot read during the week. So I'll start off with the July 31st reads, which was the beginning of this week. Technically, I think this also includes July 30th, which was Sunday, because I do tend to film these on Sunday before I've finished reading for the day. I do not have physical copies of either of them because they were both, well, one was an ARC and the other was one that I had only on an audiobook. So I'll start with that one. And that one was Good for a Girl by Lauren Fleshman. I had not necessarily had this on my radar to begin with, but then there were a lot of talk about all these several different books written by female pro runners, two of them marathoners, but they've done other distances, and one of them just a former pro who now, I don't know exactly what she does now post-pandemic, but they're all female pro runners at the top of their field who have experienced various different things over the time. And I've not necessarily been an ardent fan of this one, Lauren Fleshman, as I am of Des Linden. Now, Des Linden is my favorite, and I have grown to admire Kara Goucher and Lauren Fleshman for a lot of the reasons that she talked about in the book. Never reached the status where I was following her because she was like up there and getting great results and etc. I think she sort of, or I came onto the following pro running radar as she was tapering out of pro running for several reasons that she talks about in the book. So that sort of kept her from being sort of on my radar and from paying attention to some of these things. But Lauren Fleshman has an incredible skill with words, and she demonstrates that brilliantly in this book. She both talks about her story and how different things kept getting in the way. Like she would have these injuries or other things that would hit right when she was the qualifying for the Olympics came on, and she never qualified for the Olympics. She and Sarah Hall are some of the fastest US female runners to have never made the Olympics. But she combines her personal story with research and other studies and other stories like Mary Kay and others like that in an incredibly compelling book where if you are a female runner, it makes you extremely angry about a lot of these different things, about a lot of the things that happen to a lot of these different girls. And I definitely have put this on my wish list to get a physical copy of. The next of the two books is That Selfsame Metal by Brittany Williams. I read this as an ARC. It was the last ARC that I got in July, and I really wanted to love this one, and it didn't quite make it there. The premise was incredibly fascinating. I still like the world and the magic system that Brittany Williams built in this story is phenomenal. So the story is set in just post-Elizabethan England. So William Shakespeare is still writing and performing plays, but it is around 1610, I believe. And the main character, Joan, and her brother, they're of African descent, which is historically accurate. There were some, and it definitely shows some prejudice throughout the story at different points. But on top of the historical accuracies that Brittany Williams had and the setting, there's also a magic system. And so Joan and her brother, I think his name is James, but I don't remember for 100% certain, and their parents, they're all children of certain Orisha, different West African gods, where it's not like it's not like the demigods like Percy Jackson type where it's literally their parents. It's where these different gods basically have chosen those people, as far as I understand. And that means that they have different powers. And also there was this treaty agreement made between the Orishas, or a child of one of the Orishas, and the Fae. Made a contract that bound the Fae to do certain things and no farther, to sort of keep control on the world. But King James, who is a known witch hunter and rather interesting man who succeeded Queen Elizabeth, he sort of declines to re-up the contract, and now the Fae can do anything they want. And so the magic system and the world, it's so compelling and intriguing, and there's all sorts of different machinations going on between there. But Brittany Williams also includes a whole lot of romance, especially for Joan. Like, she is equally attracted to two different people. One of them is, I guess you could say, a half Fae creature. Another one of them is just a normal person in the theater troupe. And she's equally attracted to both. And I think there's hints at polyamory. But for me, that majorly detracted from the complex plot. It weakened it. It weakened Joan's character. And it just served as this huge distraction to the overall plot. And like, I don't mind when romance is included in fantasy plots. Obviously, I'm not a huge romance person, but I understand how it can be used, how it can further the plot, how a lot of young adult books have romance in them. I get that. When I really don't like them is when it detracts from the plot itself. For me, that was the biggest thing, the biggest negative about this book, is that it distracted from the plot itself. I don't remember my rating off the top of my head. I think it ended up a 4-star, and I'm debating whether or not I'm going to continue with the series because, like I said, the magic system, the political intrigue, the world is absolutely fascinating, but I don't think that the romance is going to be any toned down in the future books in the series. Okay, so the physical book that took me most of the work week, Tuesday through Friday, to read is one of my SEASL books, and that is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. So I knew going into this that there was a high probability that this would not be a favorite. This was talked about a lot in the big dark academia push in 2021 on BookTube. The ways that it tried to be dark academia, witchy, etc., but also it was set in high school, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I thought stretched the suspension of disbelief way too far, and those were the same things that were mentioned in a lot of those different reviews. So the setup for this is the main character, Felicity, is returning to her elite boarding school after the tragic death of her girlfriend the year before, which sort of like totally unmoored her, and she had to spend time in a psychiatric hospital. So it's setting it up to be a bit of an unreliable narrator. I know that unreliable narrators are not my thing, so I knew that going in. So she goes back to this school, and they live in different houses on the campus, and one of the people who joins them in this house, obviously it's like completely new cast of characters basically in this house, is someone who is known as a prodigy in the writing world. And she's, I think, 18 at the time of the story, but at 17 had a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. I know that it's not necessarily impossible that someone can have enough skill to write something like that and to get a lot of awards, but it's highly unlikely. But she's lauded as this prodigy and etc. And she's been homeschooled for years, and now she's coming to this school because there's also a history of the original, around the original time, the founding of this school, the Dalloway Five, where it was 5 girls who were associated with witchcraft and were all found murdered in terrible ways. And so this writing prodigy, Ellis, is coming there to research, and it's going to be her next book. And of course, the main character, Felicity, and Ellis get involved and things twist and turn and one thing leads to another, and then you have the kind of ending that I detest. Could not stand it. You've got the whole Pulitzer Prize winning at 17 thing that stretches suspension of disbelief, and then you've got what these students are actually doing at the school and the type of work that they're doing. I know that there are some people who are advanced beyond their years, but the kinds of things that they were doing at this school, that's not what you do at a high school level. That's barely what you do at a college level, like a college thesis, and typically what you do for master's work. And yet high schoolers are doing this. And some of the other things that are mysterious and creepy that don't get found out by any of the adults, I'm like, seriously? This is the way that this is going? This might tie Lies Like Wildfire as my worst of the young adult books on the SESL list. Next, we have one that I was actually really surprised about. When I saw this title, The Quantum Weirdness of the Almost Kiss, I'm like, oh, rom-coms, they're really not my thing, especially at the high school level. But after reading that one, it was nice to come to one like this where the stakes were a whole lot lower. Interestingly enough, they had some similarities, and that was the advanced boarding school, only this one was more focused on math and science. Now, some of the stuff, did it stretch believability as to the capability of the students? Just a little bit. Nowhere near as much as that one. But in this one, they are best friends. They end up going to this elite math and science boarding school together. The female protagonist, Evie, is brilliant at math, has some of her own issues, anxiety, maybe on the spectrum. She's dealing with parts of her life and a mom who constantly wants to fix her. Her mom is also a psychologist, married to a mathematician, but her mom kind of believes that all mathematicians are slightly crazy, and so she doesn't necessarily trust her daughter. And so Evie's having to deal with that. Caleb, the male protagonist, growing up has always, like, he lived next door to Evie, has always really kind of liked her, but has never wanted to jeopardize things, and so there's been a lot of almost kisses, hence the title. He's really good at coding. Is he on the same academic level as Evie? No, and he always compares himself as less than compared to her, but he's not really. He's just differently gifted. So he's having to deal with the fact that there's this new kid that's come to school who Evie's like, oh, I think I might like him. Is this what relationships are like? I think I might like that. And so he's like, oh man, I missed my shot. But obviously, does he? This is a rom-com. This is, this is a romance. There were some things that stretched the suspension of disbelief, and I got really frustrated with Evie's mom. But overall, I thought this was wholesome and heartwarming, and I ended up being pleasantly surprised at how much I liked this book. And I started that on Friday and finished it on Saturday. One that I read in its entirety on Saturday is this very short one on the middle grades list, and that is Flight of the Puffin by Anne Braden. I thought there had been more, I thought she'd written more books, but I have read her other book, which is also highly lauded, The Perks of Being an Octopus, or something about an octopus. So in this one, this is split amongst 4 different perspectives that end up becoming intertwined. And they are also split across the country. 2 of them are in Vermont, 2 of them are in Seattle, Washington. So you have the 4 different perspectives. One of them, I'm not gonna remember the different names, but the main female character, she is dealing with a lot of family history of bullying. So her family is known for being bullies, and she wants to be different, but so many people just look at her and expect that of her. But she wants to basically spread cheer to everybody. And I hated the way that people just automatically assumed negative things in association with her, and the way that her parents treated her. But she's determined to spread positivity. So she lives in Vermont. The other character that lives in Vermont lives not in the quote-unquote big city, but in the country, and so attends a 2-room schoolhouse. His name is Jack, I believe, and his family is dealing with the tragic death of his very young brother in an accident. They're also dealing with the potential closure of their schoolhouse because of the enormity of trying to meet certain state regulations to get a grant for funding. Then on the West Coast in Seattle, you have Vincent, who is an only child. His mom, single mom, used a sperm donor, so he never know a father figure, but he is not quote unquote normal. He likes math, he gets bullied a lot. And then there's another kid, T, who lives on the street, who ran away from home because their family was very bigoted and prejudiced. They figured that it would be better to live on the street than to deal with that. And then through a series of things, their stories, I should say, become intertwined. And it is one of those tug on your heartstrings, make you tear up, heartwarming, wholesome stories, even though ultimately, does everything get magically fixed? No. But the way it comes together, it's just so sweet. And I really liked this one. Okay, so that brings me to the 2 audiobooks that I read this week. And we will start with The Name of All Things by Jen Lyons. I had started listening to The Dragon Reborn, a 3rd book in the Wheel of Time. And on August 1st, I'm just like, I really don't want to listen to this. And then I saw this on my TBR and went, yeah, I want to listen to this. This, I'm not going to talk a lot about the plot and etc. of this book. Number 1, because it's book 2 in a series. And number 2, because it is incredibly confusing. That is a complex, I should say. That is a big thing with the Course of Dragons series. So I talked several weeks before when I read The Rune of Kings, book 1, that it didn't quite get to a 5-star for me, and I think that was partly because I was so sleepy and not necessarily into it at the beginning. I needed to start to try to get my footing in the complexity of the story. With this one, not only have I finished The Rune of Kings, but I've also watched Jade from J.D. Ray Reid's Everything That Happened in The Rune of Kings video, which helped me catch up on a few things that I had missed. Then I started reading this one, and a lot of people didn't necessarily like this second one because you have a similar, but not the same, story technique to The Rune of Kings. So in The Rune of Kings, you have Kieran, main character, telling his story. Then you have another character stop him at the beginning and say, oh no, you did not start far enough back. I need to start telling your story a little bit further back. And so you have those 2 storylines being told until they sort of merge together. In this one, you have 2 different storytellers, but only at a certain point are they telling 2 different storylines. They're not really telling 2 different timelines. One of them is a chronicler and he's reading his chronicle, and the other one is just telling from memory. And for a lot of the time, those 2 characters are actually together in the storyline. And so for me, that felt different. And I really enjoyed that technique at diving into this world, knowing some of the things that I had missed from The Rune of Kings. I loved this book. This, I haven't put it through Compile yet, but I'm pretty sure this is going to end up a 5 stars. The complexity of this world, I have no idea how Jen Lyons keeps everything straight, because there is so much that goes back and forth, characters twisting and turning and back and forth. It's incredibly complex. I eagerly look forward to reading the rest in this series. And then the book that I finished just a little bit ago is Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. Now, this is a different author to the Track series that I read last month. That is Jason Reynolds. And it was when I read those books that I realized, oh, those are 2 different people, not the same person. Very similar. Both of their first names starting with a J and ending with an N, and last name of Reynolds. In this book, you have high school senior Jack, he's 18 because he didn't start school, and so he was just a little bit older because he had a late in the year birthday. He's a senior. He goes on a college visit. He ends up, he's been pining for his best friend who is dating his other best friend. Complicated. But on this college visit where they're both at, he ends up meeting Kate and basically striking up this really cute relationship, but she's not telling something. It's pretty obvious that she's got some sort of illness, and it's in the synopsis that, you know, it's like boy meets girl, they fall in love, and then girl dies. Is that the end of the story? No. She dies at like 25% in, and then he goes back in time to when he first met her. And it becomes a sort of Groundhog Day story with him trying to save her and then screwing things up and being like, okay, now I need to try to save her while also not screwing this up and trying to fix that and salvage this. You can sort of guess how this is going to end. There were some parts of it that I appreciated and I thought were really interesting to look at, the different ramifications of the different decisions that Jack makes throughout this story. By around 65-70%, it really starts to get repetitive. And then the ultimate ending, I'm like, oh, okay, so we're never going to explain what happened back at the beginning that sort of sends him on this Groundhog Day living through 4 months at a time over and over again. So we're never going to do that. Is this my favorite Justin Reynolds? No. Did I think he did some pretty unique stuff in here and this was a fairly enjoyable story? Yes. Is it his best work? No. Ultimately, I think this one might end up a 4-star. Unfortunately, it might end up a 3.5 star. Obviously, since I just finished this, I haven't put it through Copile yet, so we shall see. So there you go. I read 5 books that I own physically and another 2 that I don't own physically. So somehow, even though I didn't read much throughout the week itself, I still read a lot. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.